and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Makbul with you at PTV World. In today's show, we're going to be taking a look at two important stories. The first is in reference to Pakistan's economic conditions and, of course, the upcoming budget and the expectations that come with it. While, of course, Pakistan's economy has been on a positive trajectory and we've, of course, moved forward with regards to the IMF's extended fund facility, it is extremely important to realize what sort of benefits and incentives can possibly be put forward to the general public as part of this budget and what sort of provisions can be given to the public with this regard. Of course, keeping in mind the conditionalities already in place by the IMF and the way that Pakistan wants to proceed forward. Important considerations, of course, would be the current geopolitical situation and the ways in which that political stability is required to sustain this growth and what sort of measures regarding governance and reforms are to be taken to move forward in the right directions, as well as, of course, issues like climate change and others affecting Pakistan and its economic environment, especially the global factors as well, and changes in the way that the world is working, including, of course, the US President Donald Trump's increase of tariffs and others, is something, of course, to understand whether or not Pakistan will be able to move forward to a more regional way of operating. That is going to be our focus in the first segment of the show today. Our next one is going to take a look at the security situation in the country, of course, with terrorist activities spiking, particularly in Balochistan and KP. We've also seen that as part of an intelligence-based operation, 14 terrorists belonging to Fitna al-Kharij were killed and sent to hell. And this is, of course, very, very important in the ways that Pakistan's operation continues against these terrorist elements. But, of course, as part of the larger ways and resolve in which this plan is to be put forward, particularly not just within the boundaries of Pakistan, but also with that emanating from across the border, from Afghanistan and India, is very, very important. And in the ways that Indian state-sponsored terrorism is something that Pakistan has put forward on numerous occasions with credible evidence as well. And so what needs to be done in that regard will also be covered in the second segment of the show today. For this and more, as always, in the studios, I've been joined by senior analyst Farooq Batafi, and we've also been joined online for our first segment, Dr. Waqar Ahmed, who's a senior economist. Thank you very much, Dr. Waqar, for joining us and being a part of the discussion today. And I'm going to start with, given the fact that we have a lot of concerns with regards to the current economic situation. And while, of course, we appreciate the way the government has been able to move forward with the IMF and the extended fund facility, it is very, very integral to understand how that's going to actually benefit and trickle down to the masses, and whether that change will be felt or is being felt at the moment. And so, keeping that in mind, is there any expectation of relief to be given within this budget?
Thank you very much. I think first and foremost, the important point is that government has been able to hold a decent working relationship with the fund. The fund program is on track. And I think that brings a lot of confidence to other development partners who are, of course, lending to Pakistan, who are giving technical assistance, to investors who are, of course, arranging for their pipeline investments for Pakistan. That's one. Second is that there's no room for complacency. So IMF has been very clear that the conditions, the stringent conditions still remain. Pakistan's current account is still in a fragile condition, which means that risks remain. There's a lot of borrowed money that has given us the kind of macroeconomic stability that we are seeing. But you were right in your introduction that this stability has yet to translate into job-oriented economic growth, which can give some sustainability at a household level, which can also give some relief to purchasing power at a household level. And I think connecting this with your last point, which is relief for the public, I think the reduction in inflation is a key element, which is, of course, yet to transfer, if I can say, in a comprehensive manner in terms of improved household purchasing power, relief. But nevertheless, you have seen inflation numbers come down. With a reduction in policy rate, one hopes that there'll be expansion in production capacities in both agriculture and manufacturing side, which could still further stabilize inflation, which should bring eventually good news for people below the poverty line.
Right, Dr. Saab, speaking of relief, let us talk about the expected or at least speculated relief in taxation on the salaried class. On one side, that is the issue that everybody keeps on hoping there is going to be some relief. On the other side, our taxation targets or revenue targets always remain very ambitious. Every time we see that it has to be revised downwards. Do you think that this time the ambition, the target is going to be ambitious or realistic?
Rosab, this is a very important question. So, in my personal opinion, uh, at least for this year, I'm not seeing much relief for the salaried class because overall fundamentals haven't changed yet. When I talk about fundamentals, I'm including the steep revenue targets that the government has committed with the fund. And these are inflation adjusted targets in an environment where, of course, trade is not picking up. So FBR is also under constraint.
Right. Dr. Vakar, I think we might have lost you. Can you repeat that, please? We'll try and connect once again with Dr. Vakar Ahmed, but we are not able to hear him at the moment. And Farooq, of course, this is very important, as Dr. Vakar was saying, in terms of the way that we are expecting these numbers coming in and what sort of budget is expected at the moment. But given the current scenario and the way that in the past fiscal year, in the ways that Pakistan has performed, what is your take on the ways in which certain sectors or certain areas can really be looked upon more closely within this budget?
Right, Sana, you know that Pakistan has been a part of many IMF programs. But I think that after ages, one feels that there is a government and there is a finance team which seems to be complying with all these stringent requirements of the fund. So at this moment, one can say with comfort that our direction is correct, and we are sticking to the expectations that were there. Our macroeconomic stabilization is also on cards. Regarding revenue and salaried class, what we have heard so far is there is possible relief of 1 to 1.5%. That isn't, as Dr. Saab was saying, it isn't that big a deal, but it is important at least in realizing that the government of Pakistan recognizes the salaried classes' pain. Regarding the other targets, I think that on agriculture side, one is expected to see a huge increase in the taxation. Whether that can be implemented or not, that is a big question, right? But what I really am amazed about is our commitment to crypto and the way the government seems to be actually working on a crypto policy where Pakistan can have its own strategic reserve, and on the other side on AI also. Because if you know regarding the restrictions that might be there because of Biden administration's policies like CHIPS Act and Science Act, only 18 countries have the access to the kind of technology that is needed, advanced GPUs, so to speak, or others, to build data centers that can work for AI. And unfortunately, Pakistan, what to talk about Pakistan, even India is not on the list. So that makes the job very difficult. Luckily, we have access to a country like China, and they can, of course, because they are also, breaking all bounds, so Pakistan can benefit from that.
Absolutely. Dr. Vakar has joined us again. Dr. Vakar, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. I can hear you as well. Glad to have you back. You were talking about targets, so you can complete your thought before we move forward.
Yes. So very briefly, I think I was just adding to Farooq Saab's point that while, of course, the relief for salaried class, the room seems limited, but one point that we continue to discuss on your platform is the fiscal effort required by the provinces. And this is where IMF is really insisting now that provincial governments, they have the services, GDP services sector income, which is over 50% of your national income, and that tax base lies with the provincial governments. So Farooq Saab was also talking about agricultural taxation on agriculture incomes. That is another area where the provinces have to really buckle up and contribute to the overall national revenues. Currently, FBR remains the only mega tax spinner, and it won't be able to take forward all the massive targets which IMF is expecting in the longer term.
Right. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yes, please go ahead.
Dr. Saab, one aspect that is very important, every budget we talk about SOEs, and we saw there was some effort regarding PIS privatization, but it hasn't actually come to any kind of result or only some kind of fruition. Now, do you think that in coming days we can see any kind of changes in the SOEs and how they operate, sir?
Yes. So, Farooq Saab, I think one of the things that government has accepted is that internal capacities to restructure SOEs have been weak. So, repeatedly, we have made commitments with IMF and the donors that we will work on the SOE triage plan, which is there on the website of the Ministry of Finance. But given that our capacities have been weak, we haven't been able to sort of lead that reform process from the front. You have seen that in the case of PIA, OGDCL, railways. Repeatedly, we have tried to do it, but we don't have internal capacities. Now, the thing is that you have to substitute this capacity through, of course, foreign expertise. And that is taking time. I can see that more than 11 SOEs have their transactions advisors appointed through competitive, open, transparent competition. But even the advice of those transaction advisors who have expertise in reforming the SOEs, the uptake of that advice has been fairly slow. And that also points towards the political priority that needs to be attached to SOEs. A highest level of attention is required if you want to really go after an enterprise like, for example, railways or PIA.
But regarding Gencos, we kept on hearing that perhaps there are certain units that can be sold off very quickly because they are turning a lot of profit. We haven't seen any progress regarding that either. In this budget, do you expect something of that sort to be announced?
So on that, I think, Farooq Saab, I would be a bit skeptical because most of the market players, they are pointing towards the example of K Electric, where yes, the privatization of it was successful, divestment was successful, but even after so many years, it continues to draw subsidy, untargeted subsidy from the government. So it really hasn't gone off the clutches of the government. So in case of NEPRA, for example, it has been very clear that any future privatization should disconnect these entities from government support. These entities should become profitable on their own.
Right. Dr. Waqar, given the fact that it's important, of course, to understand the way that we move forward, there's always the discussion of climate-induced disasters and the impact of that on our financial costs and expenses. And while that proper analysis perhaps may not have been done, do you think that that will be factored in terms of us allocating something for it?
Yes, I think that is an important area where Pakistan has made a strong commitment. We are getting a climate-oriented facility separately from the IMF that is separate to the current ongoing program. So I think we have attached highest level priority under the Climate Change Council, which is led by the Prime Minister. And the Minister for Climate Change has been convening regular meetings to organize arrangements around federal and province level climate finance transfers. We've also, of course, lagged behind other countries in terms of putting institutional mechanisms for validation of private sector interest in climate finance. And now, of course, climate-related registries are being put in place so that private sector interest can also be solicited for that. So this year's budget, I'm at least expecting that there will be very strong proposals which would be pro-climate.
Right. Dr. Saab, although this goes beyond the pale of the impending budget, but it is important to discuss because, as you know, a trade team is expected in Washington, D.C. to discuss a deal that will help Pakistan find new avenues in the US. Now the question at this moment is, do you think that we have the handle on such a situation? Because usually every time there are negotiations, we have only so many products. Do you think that in this budget also we can have a plan to increase the variety of things that we can produce and export to various countries, including the US?
So, first up, I think this is probably the way to go. Trade is going to be the future if Pakistan has to really grow. We have a large demand abroad, which is waiting for Pakistani products if they are competitive, of course. So, we do have internal capacities in several sectors. Unfortunately, due to, of course, supply side constraints, we couldn't meet the demand in the past. So I think this time around, I'm sure our trade negotiators will do their best to gain market access for Pakistani manufacturers. But then, of course, the fiscal policy, the budget side, also should complement the trade policy negotiations, and budgetary interventions in energy space, in tech space, should aim to bring the cost of business down in a manner which is at least par with the peer countries with whom, let's say, we have competition in the region with, like India, Vietnam, Bangladesh, China, who also produce similar genre of textile or garments.
Right. How? Through tax exemptions in certain sectors? I ask this because there is pressure to actually increase tax and also to abolish any kind of exemptions.
So I think my suggestion would be much simpler. I would say, and I've consulted with business leaders across the country, and most of the progressive ones are saying that look, we are not looking for incentives. We also understand that energy rates or tax rates won't come down anytime soon. We are under a fund program. All that they are suggesting is that there should be policy certainty. So whatever long-term tax rates have been given, for example, in your textile policy, in your auto policy, in other sectoral policies, they should at least remain in place for a certain time period so that their cash flow and balance sheets don't get disturbed. Likewise, the energy rates for the exporters as well, they should have some certainty in the long term.
Right. Regarding crypto also, Dr. Saab, there is something very interesting happening. I know that you're talking about energy being insured, energy supply being insured to various sectors, but in crypto, we seem to have created a carve-out for crypto mining. Do you think that in coming days, we can have the kind of energy supply for all these factors? And do you think that the crypto policy is moving in the right direction?
First up, I think it's important that Pakistan adds crypto as one of the asset classes that should remain available. I'm seeing this as a positive development. Pakistan has always been hungry for more asset classes, and I'm sure that much of the population, the younger population, for example, continues to work in the crypto space, however, doesn't get recognized. So, which means that capabilities and capacities to be active in the crypto market are already there. You are right in pointing out that currently there is excess of power supply, which can also be harnessed. The point that I would be careful about is that in a lot of countries where crypto plans haven't gone the right way, they end up attracting a wrong kind of hot money, which came and went. We don't want that kind of hot money coming into crypto. We want longer term inflows so that crypto adds to a reserve class of the central bank.
By actually keeping the interest rates very high for a very long time, we already were actually open to all that hot money which came and went. But another adjacent sector, and government actually seems to be focusing on that also, is AI. Now the problem, as I was actually pointing out at the start, is that Pakistan does not have access to the kind of technology that is needed. Of course, Pakistan needs to create its own data centers at a very huge scale, and for that you need GPUs, the kind of which NVIDIA and others, perhaps Pakistan does not have access to. So what is the alternative to that, Dr. Saab? Because it seems that if you don't actually compete in AI sphere, you will be left behind in the march of civilization.
Absolutely, Farooq. I think the way to go is greater attention to this subject. One, allocate more resources to this. Pakistan is the fifth biggest population, and of course, we will for at the current, of course, projection rate. We are all set to become the third largest population in the world in at least a decade and a half or 2 decades. For this kind of a population, hosting a large number of centers, which we can not only host but manage service on our own, this presents a huge opportunity for not just the younger population, but population that will be maturing with AI. I think that is an important point that we need to understand. This is a sector of the future. So most of the talk that you and I have done until now about textile, garments, auto sector, energy sector, these are very conventional sectors. AI presents opportunity of the future. Yes, it is going to be difficult to latch on to this bandwagon, but that's the way to go, given that you would be one of the largest population with, of course, enough expertise in future if we end up spending into the right kind of human capital by then.
Right, and speaking of that, Dr. Vakar, we've seen in the past years there have been cuts in the education sector, and this has very directly affected the higher education institutes in the country as well. And when we talk about, of course, HR and students and coming up with more R&D and more technology that we can use and compete with in the global market, it's important to also, of course, understand the value of investing in our youth, but we've seen cuts on that. Are we expecting more of that?
And Dr. Saab, Demis Hassabis, actually the CEO of Google DeepMind, actually has pointed out that the future of education lies in STEM. And then he also talks about the kind of capacities that can be built. Do you think that we have that kind of access or imagination that is needed for tailoring education in that sphere, in that direction?
Thank you, Farooq Sir. So I'm a bit worried actually, and I want to connect this discussion, this important point, with the upcoming budget. Currently, one of the key problems is that most of Pakistani universities are in a serious fiscal crisis. Most of them are running on supplementary grants, and they have been running to their provincial finance departments for those supplementary grants. Most of the scholarships are running behind. They are, in fact, lagging. Most of the students that we used to send in STEM education abroad, those scholarships have greatly been reduced. And I think if, for example, this budget has to be a breath of fresh air, one of the areas that could be picked up is to bring back that entire focus on the STEM education, which we actually did in 2002, 3, 4. If you look at those budgets, there was a big push effort. Foreign faculty was invited to Pakistan to serve in the local universities. Now we have more number of universities, but the universities are endowed with less budgets to spend on the kind of human capital that you are discussing. So I think that's where budgetary priorities need to be corrected.
Right, and Dr. Vakar, another important sector is, of course, especially given the current situation as well, is the defense sector. And we've seen that there is a lot of efforts put in towards defense cooperation, and we've just had the successes of that quite recently as well, and what we've achieved in terms of this cooperation with other countries, including China, for example. Will there be an increase in the defense budget this year?
So Pakistan has made a strong case to the IMF for some room to increase the defense budget. And I'm told that given the current constraints, the threat, IMF was open to discuss on that subject. Now, whatever increase one can envisage, it will never be equal to the level of threat that the country faces. So we'll need to be very smart about it, that we need to be investing in the deterrence of the future. So that sort of leads us into smart investments into cyberspace, into elements that can enhance our deterrence. So within the defense budget, my sort of suggestion has been to really look deeply into investments that take us into not just the next year or the 2 years and fulfill their priorities, but literally next decade and the next one, and then start planning that what kind of defense capacities we should be investing in very smartly, because the room is very less.
Absolutely. And does that also include putting in more resources in indigenous development?
Absolutely. So in case of indigenous development, again, partnerships is the answer, collaboration and partnerships. So while, of course, we have had good technology transfer from countries like China, I think we now need to build on that because no country on its own, it's an era of value chains. So no country on its own can claim to be 100% indigenous in all things, particularly not price takers or small open economies like Pakistan. So essentially, our best bet is to enhance partnerships and collaborations with partners going beyond China, including Turkey, Malaysia, and a host of other countries who are now aiming to build Central Asian economies, who are now aiming to forge defense partnerships, defense trade partnerships with Pakistan.
Right. It is fortuitous, Dr. Saab, that you have mentioned China, because there seems to be something very interesting going on. You have seen the kind of surprises China gave to the West regarding DeepSeek, and then now BYD is also just knocking, Tesla out of the park. But at that time, when Pakistan was confronting India, at that time, Pakistan seems to have also given a surprise. So there seems to be one thing very clear, that our ability to localize development seems to be ahead of India. Do you think that that will also work in the coming days?
Absolutely, Farooq Saab. And I think there's been a demonstration effect of what you are saying. And now, of course, as you can readily see, in the past 1 or 2 weeks, you have seen other countries who are interested in Pakistan's indigenous portfolio, not just talking about tangible products or services. They actually want to discuss, brainstorm how has this ecosystem of defense production been put in place. And of course, it's been a long time coming. Some of these things were known to public, some weren't known to public, but were exercised in the recent war. And now the world, of course, knows about that prowess.
Right. Dr. Vakar, we've also heard a lot of emphasis in the past on cost cutting and austerity, and especially with regards to government officers or governance in general. Does that help in any regard, and whether or not a substantial effort in this direction is expected?
So governance reforms have essentially been slow. And they are partly, of course, due to the political uncertainty that Pakistan faced prior to 2023. You can also see that in case of some provinces, federal-provincial relations continue to be strained, and they, of course, impact governance reforms. And linking these governance reforms, of course, to the economy space, you have public finance management, which is getting affected. So you have a province like Khyber Pakhtunkhwa who continues to, of course, have issues with the federal government with regards to, of course, transfers from the divisible pool, vertical transfers as well. But then, of course, you also have Balochistan, which oftentimes has reservations of its own. I think while, of course, resource sharing is a political subject, it's a difficult subject, but my appeal has always been that what...
Okay. Right. Unfortunately, we've lost you once again, Dr. Vakar. And we've missed out on what your appeal has been. But thank you very much for joining us and being a part of the debate. And we'd love to hear more from you. Farooq, anything to add on the budget before we continue?
Yeah, actually, I wanted to ask him whether there are areas that he thinks that can be actually included and we might not have actually touched upon, but we have lost him right now. And regarding certain things, Sana, I think that in Pakistan there has been a lot of push for startups. And the biggest problem seems to be that we don't have the kind of VCs that are needed. Last time when there was a coalition government after PTI and before the election, headed by the same Prime Minister, there was a VC fund that was created particularly for IT. I think at this moment what we need to do is drop everything else and focus on AI-related data centers capacity building. And there, if you can actually include people, look, if you go to our various organizations like Samida, which have the long list of proposals for startups, usually they end up talking about poultry farms and other farms, right? Or small tuck shops. But why not actually tell people how important data centers are, and why not create an environment where common people can also volunteer whatever resources they have to actually contribute to the kind of AI ecosystem that we need to compete in the market. So I hope that in coming days we see VC culture where private sector is also encouraged, but also where a government can also create its own fund that also contributes as well.
Absolutely. We're now going to take a look at our next segment, which focuses on the security situation. And while we, of course, talk about growth, this is very, very important as well in terms of peace and security within Pakistan for our citizens. And we've just seen an intelligence-based operation being conducted in North Waziristan, in which 14 terrorists belonging to Fitna al-Kharij were killed. But this is important also in terms of the larger sense of our approach towards these terrorist organizations, both within the borders and then, of course, the external factors coming in. And Farooq, we've just recently, of course, also pointed that out, particularly with India and the delegation that's in different world capitals is also talking about how Indian state-sponsored terrorism exists and how we are the ones that are calling for neutral investigations into different incidents, including those in the occupied valley as well. But we haven't really seen that happening or those calls being met by our neighbor. And while we talk about these issues, it's something that we're suffering and our people are suffering from. And so when we talk about our approach or our national response towards these terrorist organizations, how are we dealing both with the internal and external threats?
Right, Sana, just to actually point out that India recently lost 26, 27 people, and it thought that it thought compelled to take action, even though it did not have any evidence, right? I just heard Prime Minister of Pakistan actually repeating the point that the government of Pakistan has been making, that Pahalgam was a false flag. But the point is that look at the quantum. Pakistan lost 80,000 people or more, and the number keeps on increasing every day. I hope it stops, but it has been increasing, right? The question is that when it happens, why is it that the world cannot see that India is a huge contributory to this kind of violence? Because India has more money, because India is more packed, more loaded. But that aside, the fact is that if you are going to talk about terrorism, there has to be one standard. India has diplomatic muscle, financial muscle, perhaps political muscle also, although at this moment it seems to be exposed and isolated. But even then, it has the capacity to actually keep on adding to Pakistan's burden. Look at what they have done with IWT, right? So the world will have to wake up, because this kind of blind spot can create Hitlers and Nazis and so many other fascistic threats to the civilization, so to speak. Now, talking about Pakistan's internal challenges, regardless of who is actually sponsoring terrorism, what I really admire about the current leadership, civil and military, is the clear-eyed focus on these issues. And remember, if your house is on fire, you will first actually do whatever you can to put out that fire, rather than actually finding out who has started it, right? And this was the biggest mistake in India's case also. They had to first blame somebody, and they immediately went with it, and they did not actually care about finding the actual culprits and punishing them or finding any kind of evidence. Now, at this moment, the incidents of terrorism seem to be declining. There's a possibility that there might be some kind of equation or some kind of understanding between both sides, India and Pakistan, and then Pakistan and Afghanistan, to bring these attacks down. But even then, I'm grateful that our armed forces, our leadership actually keeps focusing on these threats, and we do everything in our power to stamp out the scourge of terrorism.
Right, absolutely. And with regards to the way that we need to have a coordinated response even within Pakistan across the provinces, we keep talking about how the first responders are very important. I understand these operations happening in terms of what's going on in KP and Balochistan and our military's response, but there's also, of course, our law enforcement agencies and the police force within the cities that are important to be trained and equipped. And we were just talking about the budget earlier as well. How much of this is also part of our strategy in moving forward, where we really put in resources in equipping those brave soldiers and security personnel that are at the forefront?
Right, Sana. That's why accountability is so important, because in the dying years of PTI's government, what happened was that they kept on cutting deals. And do you know who actually bore the brunt of all that barbarism that actually was unleashed as a result of this? Police in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Many policemen were beheaded by these monsters, right? And similarly, there were attacks even on police stations and prisons. So it is very important to also hold people accountable for whatever they have done. But right now, I think at this moment, even before first responders would respond to a situation, there is another very important factor that we seem to forget. I mean, in discourse, of course, on policy level, on execution level, they must be working, and that is intelligence. And remember that there was this NISP, National Internal Security Policy, some 10 years ago, 11 years ago. It was focused on various measures, including intelligence sharing between so many institutions, right? Whichever collect intelligence. That was a great idea, and we have actually created prototypes one after another, but sadly they fall apart. It is very important to actually focus on that too, but then you are right. The human cost has been huge, and especially the weaker side of their response, that is the civilian side, needs to be addressed, because the policemen, the people who are actually tip of the spear, so to speak, are exposed to this barbarism that they shouldn't be, and they should have the kind of gear and support that is needed by the state of Pakistan.
Absolutely. Thank you, Farooq, for that. And of course, being part of the debate as always is something definitely that needs to be thought about. And we hope the government is cognizant of that as we move forward and really understands, while we, of course, value our soldiers and our security personnel, it's important also to equip them with the necessary resources needed. That's all that we have from the debate at the moment. We'll now see you tomorrow.